I was the picture of perfection in everyone's eyes, wealthy, educated, and married to a man at it all. But perfection is nothing more than a mask. Behind the closed doors of my luxurious mansion, my life was suffocating. My husband, Ahmed, was a successful businessman who spent more time with his clients than with me. Loneliness became my constant companion. I was surrounded by opulence, yet I felt invisible. That was when Yusuf entered my life. He wasn't just a driver. He was attentive, respectful, and far too handsome for his own good. At first, our conversations were innocent. Small talk during long drives, fleeting smiles exchanged through the rearview mirror. But one evening, as the sun set over the city, his gaze lingered a little longer, and my heart betrayed me with a flutter. It was harmless, I told myself, a fleeting attraction born out of my loneliness. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. "Madam, you seem troubled," Yusuf said one day, his voice warm and inviting. For the first time, I let my guard down. I shared pieces of my life with him, pieces I had never even told my husband. He listened intently, his dark eyes never leaving mine, and for the first time in years, I felt seen. One evening, after an eventful gala, Yusuf drove me home as usual. The air in the car was thick with tension. As we pulled into the driveway, I hesitated before stepping out. "Thank you, Yusuf," I said, my voice softer than I intended. He turned to face me, his expression unreadable. "Anything for you, madam," he replied, his tone layered with something unspoken. That night, I lay awake, replaying the moment in my head. His gaze, his words, they stirred something within me. The next day, I found an excuse to spend more time with him. "Yusuf, I need to visit the countryside estate. Can you take me?" He nodded, his usual professionalism intact. But I noticed the slight curve of his lips, a smile he quickly hid. The drive was long, and as the cityscape faded into lush greenery, our conversation grew bolder. "I envy your freedom," I admitted, looking out the window to avoid his reaction. "Freedom isn't always what it seems, madam," he replied, his voice tinged with sadness. "But I envy your world too." His words caught me off guard. I turned to face him, and our eyes met. This time, neither of us looked away. By the time we reached the estate, the line between us had blurred. He opened the door for me, his hand brushing mine briefly. That touch sent a jolt through me. "Thank you, Yusuf," I murmured, my voice barely audible. The tension was undeniable now, and the walls of propriety that once held me back began to crumble. As we walked through the estate, the silence between us grew heavier. Finally, I stopped and turned to him. "Yusuf," I began, my heart pounding, "do you ever feel trapped?" He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mix of longing and hesitation. "Only when I'm close to something I can't have." I didn't think I couldn't think. Before I knew it, I stepped closer, breaking the invisible barrier between us. His breath hitched, but he didn't move away. Instead, he held my gaze, as if asking me to make the next move. "I don't know what I'm doing," I whispered, my voice trembling, but my feet rooted me in place. "You don't have to," Yusuf replied softly. "Sometimes we don't need to have all the answers." Before I could second-guess myself, I closed the distance between us. My hand lightly brushed against his, and I felt the warmth of his skin. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his voice low but steady. I nodded, unable to find the words. My actions spoke louder than anything I could have said. He took my hand gently, his fingers grazing mine in a way that made my heart race. The world around us seemed to fade. The soft breeze carried the scent of the garden as he leaned in, his lips brushing mine. It was hesitant, as if he feared crossing a line. But the hesitation didn't last. The kiss deepened, igniting a fire within me I hadn't felt in years. For once, I didn't care about the consequences. I didn't care about appearances, expectations, or even my marriage. In that moment, all that mattered was him and how he made me feel alive again. The sound of my phone vibrating in my purse brought us back to reality. I pulled away, my mind racing. "It's Ahmed," I said, panic creeping into my voice. Yusuf stepped back, his expression unreadable. "You should answer," he said quietly, his tone resigned. I stared at him for a moment before answering the call, forcing myself to sound composed. "Hello, darling," I said, my voice steady. As Ahmed spoke about some business deal, my eyes remained on Yusuf, who stood silently, his hands clenched at his sides. When the call ended, I took a deep breath, unsure of what to say. The weight of what just happened was overwhelming. "I'm sorry," I said finally, my voice barely audible. Yusuf shook his head, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Don't be," he said. "I'll always be here for you, no matter what." As I returned to the mansion that evening, my mind was a whirlwind of emotions. I had crossed the line I could never uncross, and yet, a part of me couldn't bring myself to regret it. What happened next would change everything, and there was no turning back. The following days were a blur of stolen glances and fleeting touches. Every moment with Yusuf felt like walking on the edge of a precipice. One afternoon, as I sat in the back seat while Yusuf drove, his voice broke the silence. "Are you happy, madam? Truly happy?" His question caught me off guard. I hesitated, searching for an answer I didn't have. "I don't know," I admitted. "That's not the life you deserve," he said, his tone filled with quiet conviction. That evening, Ahmed announced he had to leave for a business trip. It was the perfect excuse to explore the forbiddens even further. As soon as he left, I found myself texting Yusuf, "Can you come over?" I typed, my heart racing as I hit send. His reply was almost immediate. "Of course. I'll be there in an hour." The wait was agonizing. When he finally arrived, the sight of him standing at my door sent a shiver down my spine. "Come in," I said, my voice betraying my nervousness. The tension between us was palpable as he stepped inside. I closed the door behind him, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. "I shouldn't be here," he said finally, his voice filled with conflict. "But you are," I replied, stepping closer. "And I don't want you to leave." The space between us disappeared as he pulled me into his arms. His kiss was urgent, filled with everything we had been holding back. We moved together, the world outside fading into nothingness. For the first time in years, I felt truly alive. But as the night wore on, reality crept back in. What we had done was a line we could never uncross. "I can't keep doing this," Yusuf said softly as dawn began to break. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. "You're leaving me?" I asked, tears welling in my eyes. "I'm not leaving," he said, "but we need to figure out what this means for both of us." I nodded, unable to find the words. The gravity of our actions hung heavily in the air. As he left that morning, I watched him go, my heart torn between desire and guilt. This was only the beginning, and I knew that whatever came next would change both of our lives forever. The days that followed were filled with a whirlwind of emotions. I tried to focus on my daily life, but Yusuf's presence lingered in every corner of my mind. Ahmed returned from his trip, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface. His usual routine left little time for questions, but I wasn't the same. Every smile, every word from him felt hollow, as though I was watching a play I no longer belonged to. One evening, as Ahmed worked late in his study, I found myself in the garden. The cool breeze did little to calm my restless thoughts. A soft vibration in my pocket pulled me from my reverie. It was a message from Yusuf. "Can we talk?" My heart raced as I replied, "Meet me at the park." It was the only place we could talk without prying eyes. The night was quiet as I arrived. Yusuf stood by a bench, his figure illuminated by the soft glow of a nearby lamp. "I'm sorry for pulling you into this," I said, my voice trembling. "You deserve better?" Yusuf shook his head, stepping closer. "Don't blame yourself. I made my choice too." As we stood there, the weight of our situation pressed down on us. "What do we do now?" I asked, tears threatening to fall. Yusuf hesitated before replying. "We either end this now or face whatever comes together, but we need to decide tonight." The ultimatum hit me harder than I expected. I knew the risks, but the thought of losing him was unbearable. "Together," I said finally, my voice firm. "We face this together." A faint smile appeared on his face, and for a moment, the world felt right again. "Then we'll figure it out one step at a time," he said. But as we embraced under the dim light, a shadowy figure emerged from the darkness. My heart sank as Ahmed's voice cut through the silence. "So this is what you've been hiding," Ahmed said coldly, his eyes filled with a mix of anger and betrayal. I froze, unable to speak. Yusuf stepped forward, trying to explain, but Ahmed raised a hand to silence him. "This is between me and my wife," Ahmed said, his voice firm. "Yusuf, leave." Yusuf hesitated, looking at me for confirmation. I nodded reluctantly, and he walked away, his footsteps echoing into the night. As Ahmed turned back to me, his expression softened slightly. "How long has this been going on?" he asked, his voice filled with hurt. I couldn't lie. "A few weeks," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Ahmed sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair. "I thought we were happy," he said, more to himself than to me. Tears streamed down my face as I replied, "I didn't mean for this to happen. I was lonely, Ahmed. You were never there." His eyes met mine, a mixture of pain and understanding. "I failed you, didn't I?" he asked softly. We stood in silence, the weight of our broken relationship hanging between us. I didn't know how to fix this or if it could be fixed. "Let's go home," Ahmed said finally, his voice steady. "We need to talk, but not here." As we walked back to the car, I realized that the life I had known was over. What came next would depend on the choices we made together. The drive home was silent, the tension between us thick enough to cut with a knife. Ahmed's grip on the steering wheel was tight, his knuckles white. I stared out the window, trying to hold back tears. The city lights blurred as my mind raced with thoughts of what would come next. When we arrived at the mansion, Ahmed gestured for me to sit in the living room while he poured himself a drink. He returned, his glass in hand, and sat across from me. For a moment, he simply stared as if searching for the right words. "I need to understand," he said finally, his voice low. "Why him? Why now?" I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts. "Because he saw me," I replied, my voice trembling. He listened. "He made me feel alive." Ahmed flinched at my words, his expression pained. "And I didn't?" he asked, his tone heavy with regret. "You didn't mean to," I said, tears streaming down my face. "You were always so busy building our life that you forgot to share it with me." He nodded slowly, staring into his glass. "I thought I was doing what was best for us," he said quietly. "I didn't realize I was losing you." The room fell silent again, the weight of our words hanging in the air. I wanted to reach out to him, but I wasn't sure if it was too late. "What do we do now?" I asked finally, my voice barely audible. Ahmed looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of hurt and determination. "We rebuild," he said firmly. "If you're willing to try, so am I." His words surprised me, and for the first time that night, I felt a glimmer of hope. "I want to try," I said, my voice steady. Ahmed reached across the table, taking my hand in his. "Then we take it one day at a time," he said. "But we need honesty, no more secrets." I nodded, knowing he was right. "I'll tell Yusuf it's over," I said, my heart aching at the thought. Ahmed's grip on my hand tightened slightly, as if bracing himself. "Thank you," he said, "for choosing us." The next morning, I called Yusuf. As his voice came through the line, my resolve wavered, but I knew what had to be done. "This has to end," I said, my voice breaking. "I can't keep hurting Ahmed. I need to focus on my marriage." Yusuf was silent for a moment before replying. "I understand," he said, his voice filled with sadness. "I wish you happiness, madam." As I ended the call, tears streamed down my face. It was the hardest decision I had ever made, but it was the right one. In the weeks that followed, Ahmed and I worked tirelessly to rebuild our relationship. It wasn't easy, but slowly we began to heal. Yusuf left his position and I never saw him again. But the lessons I learned from those moments of passion and pain stayed with me. Love isn't about perfection. It's about effort, trust, and choosing each other every single day. And that was a choice I was finally ready to make.